Hi, and welcome to another episode of If It's in the Mind, It Can Be Managed, the Mind Management Mentors podcast. I'm your host, Cuddy Cudworth, the UK's leading mind management coach, self-titled, Simon. I will tell you now that is self-titled. I call myself as something to head towards with my goals and my aspirations. But I'm a big believer, as I say, beliefs are such a powerful, powerful part of our lives, our schemas, and how we see the world. And I'm a big believer in, you know what? If it's in the mind, it can be managed. If you're liking the content so far, you're liking the podcast, like and subscribe, share as a comment, because it helps us with the algorithms and YouTube and moving forward. However, today we have a different guest, something I did start out working with when I first got into coaching and things like that. I'll be honest, most of my coaches now are actually ladies, strangely enough. But I think we're going to have that conversation of why ladies maybe are more open to coaching and wanting to move in life, whereas you like to work with men. So introduce yourself, Simon.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me on. Very much appreciated. I'm Simon. My business is called Worth Talking, and I typically work with midlife men and dads either going through divorce or trying to rebuild their life post-divorce.
Because that's harrowing, isn't it? To be fair, and I think for hopefully people will be watching this and go, oh wow, that is something that I'm going through. There's a loss of identity in there, isn't there, for men when they've gone and they're no longer husband.
Yeah, big time. I think we can lose ourselves, lose our identity. Um, I think, there's a lot of expectation gets put on us by society as a whole. And I think, even if you think about the vows that you say when you get married, till death do us part, that's a big expectation. Um,
I'm
but
laughing. I'm laughing because I'm still married. I don't have
yeah.
much longer, but I might be a client shortly, Simon. I jest. I only joke because I know how serious it is. Look, we're going to be talking men's mental health for the next hour. To be fair, Simon, that's how long we do the podcast for normally. We're going to be talking men's mental health. What can we do? It's always worth talking about using your tagline, creating these conversations so that men have somewhere to be able to identify, to be able to talk, and to be able to share. And I asked you a question before we started is like, what's the difference between working with Simon Worth or Andy's Man Club?
Yeah, and I think Andy's Man Club, absolutely fantastic organization and what they do to support mental health of men and suicide prevention and things like that. Um, it's probably easier for me to talk about what I do.
Yeah.
So what I do is I sit down with clients at first, get an understanding of their current situation, what it is they'd like to achieve, sort of obstacles that they see are in their way. Just try and get a bit of a picture, really, first and foremost. And then we just work through a process of um, rather than yeah, I think we'll talk about this word fix as we go
Yeah.
along, but rather than try and fix somebody or their life, it's about creating, looking forward. So let's create a vision of the life that you want to live, a life that helps you to feel like you're realizing your potential, helps you to feel like you're proud. You're creating a life you're proud of. And then we work backwards from there. So that gives us our destination, and we just sort of step by step work out how we're going to create that life.
So I guess you're going to be working with some real big demonstrative emotions such as shame, guilt, fear,
Yeah.
hopelessness, the lower consciousness kind of vibrational emotions that we get inhabited with. How do you help it? I'm going to say, and I'm trying to get this term out there because if people can understand the consciousness scale, how we can move up through consciousness,
Yeah.
understanding our emotions, it's an important part. But how does Simon start working, taking people from the lower echelon of the consciousness scale up?
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. I think we can live so much of our life unconscious almost, just on autopilot. And actually, I think helping people to connect with themselves, and understand themselves, build that self-awareness, self-identity, self-acceptance, um, and start kind of I guess rather than living on autopilot, just slow down, start noticing some of these thoughts and feelings that come into your head, um, and take away any labels on them, whether they're good or bad, doesn't matter. We can't control the thoughts and feelings that, well, we can't control the thoughts that come into our head. I'm a big believer that your thoughts dictate how you feel about something.
Yeah,
So I think that for me, it's about accepting the thoughts that you have, but understanding that what you can control is how you react to them. So
yes,
just because
and
I have a
that's
thought,
internally as well. That's
yeah,
when we're talking
completely.
about. We're often talking about that internal thought track, that
Mm.
internal conversations that we're too scared to talk to other people about. I know that
Yeah, absolutely.
my massive downfall years ago was failure. That was what
Mm.
shattered me.
Yeah.
So I think most coaches come from a place of experience. So are we allowed to go back, Simon, and find out what your tipping point was, of where you found yourself and how you moved forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, I've had several tipping points
Yeah,
over the years, and I think the first one really came for me when, well, even if I think back to school, I really struggled to be confident in who I was at school. I was very good at school at making people laugh. So that became my identity at school, the class clown,
I'm
never
still
knew
doing
when.
it. I'm
Yeah,
still doing it.
absolutely. And that's the thing actually, is that's part of who we are and that's part of our character. And it's over time, perhaps living life, you develop the confidence to actually embrace that. That's part of what makes me me. So, yes, sometimes it's helpful to learn when's an appropriate time to use those things, and when's not. But I'd say, first of all, for me was about school, was about confidence, identity. Um, and then I think I looked to follow that path of get a good job, earn a good salary, you know, get married, have kids. And then I got a certain way down the line with that, and realized I wasn't very happy. And actually I was very depressed. I had some struggles in the marriage that I was in, which we ended up getting divorced. Um, and I think for anybody, that's a very tricky time. Even if things are very amicable, it's a period of great change. And all of a sudden, you're not this person that you thought you were going to be. I also lost my dad at a similar time to that. Um, and so that was my first kind of real challenge where I started to think, what am I doing in my life? I think that's losing my dad gave me that first point of being aware of mortality. I think before
Yeah,
that I probably thought I was Superman. I'd just carry on forever.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden you lose somebody in your life and it kind of makes you stop and think, and all of a sudden it's like your eyes have been opened. You come out of autopilot and you're like, oh, actually, where am I? What am I doing? Is this what I want to be doing? And so that was a challenging time. I think what a couple of things helped me actually with that was one was I discovered rugby coaching. So my two sons got to an age where they could start playing rugby, and I got involved with the coaching as one of the dads, and it was a real light bulb moment. It was a real like somebody had just flicked a switch. I absolutely loved it, and it wasn't the kind of winning matches or tournaments that excited me, which is probably just as well because we didn't win many. But it was more the developmental side of things, helping kids sort of develop and grow confidence, build teamwork, team spirit, all those sorts of things. Um, and the whole sort of approach, questioning approach, not telling, really resonated with me. And so that was my first sort of glimpse into what could be a potential future for me. Um, and so yeah, I think following the breakup of my marriage, um, the divorce, I was left in a very low place because I just couldn't see what the future held for me. And I think as we mentioned earlier on, felt a failure, felt I'd let people down, felt I'd let myself down. Um, I felt tremendous guilt for what that was putting the kids through. Um, but equally there was a realization that staying in the relationship wouldn't actually do the kids much good either, so
Yeah.
um that was a real sort of test for me and a real struggle for me, and I was lucky at that point that a guy I played rugby with a few years before, um who had been a GP, but then, in his words, became more interested in wellness than illness. He was a coach, and he really helped me. And so experiencing that, about looking forwards, not backwards, I found that a real sort of helpful turning point. And then more recently, well, I'm trying to do it in a linear way, I guess, but also following the divorce, one of my sons had a real difficult time. He became involved in things that every parent dreads, and we had a probably about 4 or 5 years of real sort of struggle and a real sort of torrid time with him, and trying to get him back to a better place and away from the things that he was involved in. And I'm pleased to say he is now, and he's in a really good place. Um, and then more recently, about 4 years ago, after having COVID, I started having some complications after that, and I was actually I was in my car going to meet a client, and started getting chest pain, started losing my vision, started going numb down my arms and legs and in my face, and I thought, oh crikey, this is it, I'm having a heart attack, and really, really scary. And my thoughts very quickly went to, you idiot, why haven't you looked after yourself? Why, a lot of sort of self-abuse, self-blame. Um, and then there was just a general sense that I hadn't, I wasn't ready to die. I hadn't lived the life that I wanted to live. I
Yeah.
hadn't achieved the things I wanted to achieve. I didn't feel like I'd fulfilled my potential. Um, and I didn't feel, other than my kids, I had a life that I was proud of, So, um, and I had about 3 years of real struggle with that. After that, sort of anxiety attacks, panic attacks, worrying about my health and things like that. And but actually, it was a real catalyst for me to refocus my coaching business. That
Mm,
if I was sitting here feeling like I hadn't made the most of my life, that I hadn't realized my potential,
mm.
if I didn't feel proud of the life that I was living, um, then I can't be the only person on the planet that feels like that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of pain became a purpose of really wanting to work with people that, feel like they haven't reached their potential, they haven't fulfilled their potential, they're not living the life they want to live, and there's more to come, and so, I think it's that really helped me sort of focus on helping other people create the next chapter in their life. Because I think, just like a book, you're reading a chapter, you're thinking, oh my God, the hero's in mortal danger, and what's going to happen? He's never going to get out of this, or she's never going to get out of this. And then you turn the page, and all of a sudden things start coming together, and you have your happy ending. So I think it's I think when we're in the middle of those situations, it's very hard to see a way out at times. It
Yeah.
can feel like you're at the bottom of a very, very deep and dark hole,
Yeah.
um, and hard to see the way out. So I think, what I do, I guess, is sort of help provide a torch and a ladder. So,
Yeah.
you can find your way forward, you can find your way out of the hole. Um, and you can create a life that is very happy, that's very fulfilling, um, and that ultimately that you feel proud of.
So beautiful story, by the way, Simon. If there's ever a man of experience, you clearly are it. So thank you very much for sharing. Um, Definitely worth talking about. So if there's a man right now who is gone at the doctors, and this is again, it's never an attack on doctors, because I know doctors. I'm good friends with the doctors. I mean, Cuddy, we've got 7 minutes. We've got 7 minutes per person. We just have to sit. We have to diagnose, and we have to, you know, we try not to give tablets. I've spoken to a lot of doctors. We try not to give tablets, but basically, a lot of people don't really want to work with that core belief, that core root root cause problem. They don't want to do the work. They want to do the tablet, right? So they get the tablet. They have depression, knowing that, to be fair, I think the statistics is 60% success rate with a placebo and 64% success with a SSRI antidepressant. There's a 4% difference
Yeah.
for how they work, which is why they can say antidepressants work. I think people are waking up to the fact that maybe antidepressants just make us feel numb and not get us dealing with the things that have happened in the past that make us feel broken.
Yeah.
And we both touched on that. Nobody's broken.
Mm.
Even though we feel it, even though we can say it. But when you're wanting to get the message out, Simon, and I can't say, I knew somebody who is a relative of a close friend, and they've just passed away. And I just think it's, how do we get them? So I didn't know when I was first, I didn't know what depression was. When I was going through my slump, which is what? God, it must be 13 years ago now. No, it's probably not. It's probably about 15 years ago now. I went through a slump. I didn't know what depression was. So when I got told, oh, it's depression, I kind of shit myself. I'm like, no, that's what mental people have, and that's what all these other people have. They went, no, it kind of sounds like you're depressed. So I had to go on this massive journey of understanding. And I think it's a shame that a lot of people still don't understand what depression is.
Yeah.
And having conversations like this is, if we can get the message out that depression is an emotional state that we're probably all going to go through in life,
Mm.
created by the actual association and awareness of our thoughts, not understanding, exactly like you touched on, Simon. What have I not got? What I don't have? What I can't do? Instead of what I do have, what I can do, and let's look forward. That sheer focus, people will say, use gratitude, use these powerful, affirming things to move us. Because we touched about it before. It's not about positive thinking.
Yeah.
You don't feel it. Positive thinking is going to be absolute bullshit. To be fair, I think we can. Simon, if I'd have said to you when you were on your downward slide, oh, you need a bit more positive thinking, would you have not been going, fuck off, wanker? You've got no idea what I'm going through. True or false?
Yeah, you can't say to yourself, "Oh, silly me, what what was I thinking? You know, why didn't I think of that?" But I, and it's I think it's understanding the difference between telling somebody to think positively. You know, you got nothing to be depressed about, or just focus on positive things. Um, I think it's about what is helpful is thinking about what are the things that I'm grateful for in my life. So even when things are really bad, there are still things that we can find gratitude for, you know, whether that's family, friends, um, you know, a sunny day, the most basic of things. You know, sometimes it's just finding something as simple as it's a sunny day today, you know.
Yeah,
Um, and it sounds silly to some people, but actually, I think the best example I can give of that is that when I was after I had my complications from COVID, I worked very little for about 2 or 3 years. You know, it was very difficult to get any consistency with work,
yeah,
and I made some poor choices in that time financially. You know, to keep the roof over the head and food on the table and all that sort of stuff. But it meant that coming out of that period, I was in debt.
mm. Of
Now, that's really depressing being in debt, or it can be.
course it
You
is.
know.
Absolutely.
And what the best way I can explain is if I sat here thinking about, oh my God, I'm in all this debt, how am I ever going to get out of it? Versus, okay, what are the things that I can do to create wealth in my life? What are the things that I can do to earn money that then
Yeah,
creates the opportunity for me to reduce my debt, to pay off my debt, create a financially abundant life again, you know? And if you focus on the things you can do, and the positive things rather than the negative situation. I think those are the things that help, and as we said earlier, you can't necessarily control the thoughts that come into your
yeah,
head, but what you can do is control how you react to them. You can challenge them.
yeah.
Just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. Um,
Feelings are not facts.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key things for me, first of all, is kind of acceptance. Okay, I am where I am. I wouldn't have chosen to be here, but I am where I am, and I can't change that. Given I am where I am, what can I do from this point? to improve things, even if it's just one step, even if it's just moving forward 1 inch. What's one thing I can do that's going to make things slightly better? And there's no silver bullet, there's no magic wands wave. I think for me, it's about creating good daily habits or good habits that repeated daily make a big difference over time. I think that's probably the best way of putting it, I think.
So another another man is listening to this podcast and he's like, how do you spot the signs of I'm not where I should be in life? What you talked about was basically changing the language, which
Yeah.
I think I've got a feeling, Simon, we both come from a place of NLP. I think you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when I was going through my challenges, I went to the doctors, and I've always said that story. They offered to give me antidepressants, and I said no, I don't really want to take tablets. I've never really been a fan of taking tablets. I actually don't know if that's true, to be fair, and I want to be open and honest about that because this was many, many years ago. I do remember him saying, "Oh, you can have. I've got a phone number for the St. Marathons," and I'm like, actually, I'm not really suicidal, to be fair. I'm just
Mm.
absolutely fucking exhausted from this internal chatter that just will not
Yeah.
turn off. I mean, I thought I was schizophrenic. I had that
Mm.
many conversations going on. So I Googled when I got home. The doctor went, well, if you're not going to take a tablet, I don't really know what I can do to help. So I was pretty like, well, that's another fucking shitter, obviously. So I came home and I just Googled how to get past depression.
Mm.
And I think the first three things that came up is the best thing for depression is NLP. So I was like, right, I'll buy an NLP book. Holy shit.
Mm.
Whether you think it's a pseudoscience or not, pseudoscience being a science that's not real and there's no technical proof for it working, it is extremely powerful.
Mm.
I think and I call myself a mind management coach, Simon. So what I did, I took all the best strategies from life coaching and the best strategies from NLP, and I created mind management.
Mm.
Sometimes there was a little bit of waffle with a few things in life coaching and things like that. I'm like, that's bullshit. That's just not that.
Mm.
Doesn't work for me and things like that. So that's how mind management was created. I took these powerful modalities, fused them together, and created these techniques that genuinely can help reform trauma in a quickly thing. But for men right now, they're sat, they've just split up with their partner. The kids are at home. You've just moved in to a flat.
Mm.
Still got your job. What's going to be going through, or what was going through your mind, Simon? So that somebody
Yeah.
else can identify it.
Yeah, I think what went through my mind at that time was it was predominantly around the kids, actually. It was
Mm.
really missing the kids. So having gone through a situation where, you're 7 days a week, 24/7 with the kids, other than sort of going away with work and things like that, to all of a sudden be seeing them at the weekend or every other weekend initially, that was hell. It was really, really difficult. And it's irrelevant whether you're the one that's made the choice to change things, to end the marriage or to separate, or whether your partner did. Um, the situation is what it is, and it just feels crap, and that's okay. I think part of the acceptance thing is accepting it is going to feel shit, but it won't feel shit forever, and over time, that you start having those conversations around things like, custody, shared custody,
Mm.
um, what's best for the kids, all that kind of thing. So there is a big period of adjustment, and it's a bit like the model of change. Was it the Kubler-Ross model, is it, or something like that? And
Yeah,
you it works exactly the same, whether it's grief, whether it's some other big
yeah.
change in your life, it works exactly the same way, So you do need to accept that there'll be a period of kind of mourning, what was, that things have changed, and you slowly start to get used to a new way of being. But I think, going back to the thoughts and I think when you start noticing words and phrases like I should, I shouldn't, I must, I
Language.
have to, yeah, absolutely.
Shoulda,
So
coulda,
I think,
woulda.
Yeah, I think noticing the language that you use with yourself is really important. Um, and we would never talk to our family or friends the way we talk to ourselves at different times, and
Why is that? Why
um,
do we think we're less than the pets around us, or the children
yeah,
around us, or the other people around us?
yeah. And sometimes I don't even think we notice that voice as such. It's just something that's there. It's always been part of us, and but I think that that's part of it is understanding that those thoughts that come into your head aren't reality. They're not true. They might be true, but
Mm,
equally they're not necessarily true. And it's okay to challenge them. It's okay to um, to push back and you know. So I think so. Yeah, going back to what you're saying, I think it's firstly it's understanding it's going to be a very difficult period of time. Um, it is about focusing on the what's the 1% of improvement I can find? What would make this 1% better? And over time, over each day, each week, each month, things do slowly and gradually start to improve. And I think as you say, things like NLP, cognitive behavior therapy,
mm,
mindfulness, all those things help, because they help you notice your thoughts and your feelings and
mm.
um, that is very important. And I think, the other thing is how much we suffer is dictated by how much we allow our thoughts just to fester.
Yeah,
If we leave our thoughts unchecked, then we can really make ourselves suffer,
yeah,
and um so I think it's important to try and find somebody that you feel comfortable to talk to.
yeah.
And again, it's not about a magic bullet, a silver bullet or a magic wand to wave,
Mm,
that somebody will say one sentence and that will change everything for you. That's not the reality of it might, but that's
mm.
not really the reality of it. And but I think there's somebody said to me once, there's value even in talking to a lamppost. Just saying things out loud, getting it out of your head. Once you say it out loud, it takes on a different meaning. It takes on a different sort of being, if you like. And I think when we keep things internal, we keep things in our head, they feel heavier, they feel bigger, they feel nastier, scarier, more vicious. Yeah,
We suffer more in our minds or in our solitude than what's actually in reality, isn't it? The conversations
absolutely.
are a hell of a lot scarier. I always I always try and use the analogy of don't be scared of writing it down. Look how well Stephen King did out of it.
Yes, yeah,
Right?
yes,
Because there's Stephen King stories had to come from somewhere, right?
yeah. And
Let's
and
be honest, that was
writing,
in his mind.
yeah, and I think writing is actually very useful for a number of things. I think even more so than typing on a computer. That, yeah, within that, obviously, it's very important that people do what works for them. But what I found was that actually writing things down with a pen on a piece of paper was a lot more cathartic than typing it in a Google Doc or a Word doc or something like that. And there's all kinds of things you can do with that then. You can write that thought down, set fire to it. Obviously, a very health and safety environment. Don't burn your house down, but you can throw it away. You can tear it up. There's things that you can do with it that help down the process, which probably fit a bit more into sort of NLP and things like that. But yeah. I think being awareness is one of the most important things, in terms of catching your thoughts. I think that's really important because I think if we leave those unchecked, they can be quite damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. So Simon, you are based in well actually let's talk about actually before I start saying where you're based and things like that. Let's touch on it's not just about men, and this is a subject quite close to my heart. It's not just about men who have gone through divorce. We struck up on a conversation about what if you have a loving husband and the wife is going through menopause and the wife has changed an awful lot because of the menopause, which is absolutely brutal. And a man wants to be, or the husband or the partner wants to be the person who's there to help and support, but does feel lost themselves. How would a gentleman or a person, a partner, help go through that with someone because it is brutal for the ladies going through the menopause.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most helpful thing probably is to sit down with your partner and have a conversation and ask them, and say, what can I do to help? How can I support you? Find out what their needs are.
So
So
when her reply is stop breathing, how
it's
how do you
totally
navigate
understandable.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I think finding the right time to talk, and that's a really unhelpful word, the right time, but
There's never
you
a
know,
right time.
trying to find an appropriate time to talk, perhaps where symptoms, where things aren't as bad as they can be, and they can be absolutely horrendous for people. So yeah, I think trying to find a time to sit down and talk, ask the question, what can I do to help? How can I support you? What do you need from me? You know, the answer might be, I don't need anything from you. I just need you to understand that, you know, what I'm going through, and this is difficult, and just be there, whatever it is. But I think there's never a one size fits all approach for these things. Um, I think there's a lot we can do. I'm very big on taking responsibility, taking ownership. So what can I do to learn more about the menopause?
Hmm.
Davina McCall wrote a very good book, and I think actually as partners, as men, I think it's helpful to read things like that. So you get a sense of understanding. Um,
What if the man has more understanding than the wife of the menopause?
yes, but you would never mention that.
Maybe that's where the problem is. Maybe
Yes,
I've mentioned
absolutely.
it too much.
And
But
I think the thing with men as well is, one, we try and fix everything.
right, because
Uh,
that was where I was going to go next. Now, and I
yeah.
remember this from a really young age. I was in a relationship, very, let's say 17, 18, maybe, actually, it might have been 19s or 20s. And I read a book, Men Are From Venus. No, Men
Yes.
Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, this literally explains. I suppose it was one of the first books that I read on the personal development journey at a very young
Yeah.
age. And I was like, oh my God, men, oh, absolutely. Men are fixers. They don't want to look at maps to find out where they're going. They want to figure it out themselves.
Yeah.
Ego and pride is in there. I don't need a map. I can figure out my directions
Yeah.
myself. Or when a lady comes to you with a problem, I want to fix that problem because that's the
Yeah.
man's responsibility. Whereas a woman wants to be heard, listened to, and just understood. She'll sort her own shit out.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think even around that, there's nuance around that. So it's very hard to generalize. Some women want X, some men want Y, but not all men, not all women. So I think, again, I think the word communication is so useful for just about every situation we're in. And that's the one thing that can help massively with any problem that we go through, or any challenge that we face, is actually communicating with each other. But it's actually one of the hardest things to do.
And it is because, to be fair, for anyone that's listening to this now, what the reason communication is the missing piece in relationships is a lot of the times, and this is where monkey mind comes into it, we're only listening to respond or
Yeah,
to react. We're not listening to have that information filtered through.
yeah,
So a
yeah,
lot of the times in relationships, you're not listening to each other. You're just waiting for them to stop speaking so you can get your point of view across.
yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing is probably what all of our collective experiences have taught us is that our brains aren't very good at filling in the gaps. So very rarely do we have all the information. We'll only have, part of the story, part of the information, and then our brains fill in the gaps for the rest.
And they can fill
So
it up with total shite as well.
completely. So that's the problem, is that a lot of the time, the way we then go and try to communicate, it's after having had probably 3 hours of backwards and forwards in our own brains, having come up with 101 reasons why, our partners haven't been very chatty that day, but
It's
generally,
emotional reasoning. We fill in the gaps
yeah,
with our emotions and
yeah.
we project. Absolutely.
And I think the brain is very good at problem solving, but it's not very good at mind reading and crystal ball gazing,
But we do mind read. That's the emotional reason part.
Yeah,
We mind read everyone else because of how we're feeling. We're like, well, why did you look at me? So they create a
yeah,
story and a
yeah,
meaning and to something that's not real. We
yeah.
are absolutely shite at stuff if we don't know, right?
It's true, and I think also depending on and a word that gets thrown around a lot at the moment, neurodiversity, and yeah, we're all on this scale at somewhere, so we're all neurodiverse to a lesser or a greater extent, but depending on where you sit on that scale, it can affect how you interpret things. So whether it's the tone of the voice, whether it's a facial expression, you know, those can be interpreted in a particular way. But I think again, it's all important in understanding ourselves. It is vitally important. If I understand myself, then that helps me communicate better with my partner. If I can then take it a step further and understand my partner, and we both understand each other, then happy days. You're going to set yourself up for probably more successes than failures. But equally, again, that's a pretty unhelpful way of looking at it. In all honesty, success and failure. You know, the I think life very rarely is smooth. There's ups and there's downs. Um, and I think again, part of acceptance is accepting that we will go through good phases in life where things are great and we think, oh, isn't this amazing? And we'll also go through dips in life where we think, Jesus, how could things get any worse? Um, but as there's a story, isn't there? This too shall pass. And
Yeah, just like the storms, just like the weather,
yeah, that's it.
just like the Scottish weather, Simon, of which we're both
Yes.
well adapted to. Do you know? I'm going to throw out a tip that's one of the best things that I did for myself. And it was the overthinking that decimated me for so many things.
Mm,
I didn't realize I was stuck in this overthinking loop because of fear. But one of the things that I got, and it's a powerful book, and that's why I call myself a mind management coach, is The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Stephen P.
yeah, it's brilliant.
Great
Yeah,
book. Great book.
yeah.
It's very in depth, very, very deep. But I remember one thing that I carry with me today. So I want to share this with absolutely anyone that's watching right now. And I know we're coming towards the end of the podcast. Is learning how to manage expectations.
Mm,
And a change in the expectations is have the lowest expectations of everyone around you, but raise your expectations of yourself.
mm,
And that can be quite triggering for a lot of people.
yeah.
But they went, that's quite a pessimistic way to it. I said, I actually, my positive mindset comes from a place of no expectation.
Mm,
So people surpass my expectations on a daily basis because I had none.
yeah.
Whereas I used to have really high expectations of everyone else, thinking, well, if I do this, they should do this.
Yeah.
Let's use that. Let's look at the language. Should, because I
Yeah.
do it, everyone else do it. I was constantly getting let down.
Mm,
That was affecting my emotional state. So I was all over the place because guess what? My emotions weren't my emotions. They
mm,
were absolutely in the place of somebody else's actions, beings, and life. So that created me being a victim of my own emotions because they weren't mine and I didn't understand them. And then I would say, it's not me that's the problem, it's these people. They're all wankers.
mm,
Again, victim mindset. So I changed that to raise the expectations of myself and have really low expectations of everyone around me. And guess what? The amount of time I was surprised on a daily basis, my emotional well-being went through the roof. I was like,
yeah.
actually, I
Yeah.
don't have to expectations about anyone else. And my wife says this, I love it. Still cracks me up to this day. Just remember, she doesn't call me Cuddy because that's not my real name. She'll always say, just remember, people are cunts. And it's the best way
Yes. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
take back. So she's Scottish, Simon. I know you've moved
Mm,
up to Glasgow and things like that, but my
absolutely.
wife is Scottish. And she'll, because I still get let down
Yeah.
when things are not going right in business. Simon,
Mm,
same as yourself. And I'm like, oh, God, this and this. We still have it. And I do come from a place of experience. And I'm like, still get depressed
yeah.
sometimes. I
Yeah.
don't have depression. I'm not stuck in depressed states for years.
Yeah.
I still have those down days because that's what emotions do to us. They're like roller
Absolutely.
coasters.
Yeah.
You're going to
And
have
and
to have an up and you're going to
yeah.
have a down.
And as you say, expectations are really good thing to think about, because I think disappointment for me comes from expectation. If I expect X to happen and Y happens, then I'm going to be disappointed, you know.
Exactly.
And I think, going back to sort of taking ownership and taking responsibility, there's only two things in life we can actually control, and that's what we say and what we do.
Mm,
So if I'm putting expectations, on you or anybody else for that matter, well, I'm not in control of that. I can't control that outcome. And so I think, bringing your focus back to, okay, well, what can I control, influence?
yeah.
What can I say? What can I do? And almost remove any sort of expectation of outcomes. Focus on the habits, focus on the actions, and the outcomes will kind of take care of themselves. But I think you're absolutely right. Comes back to communication again. If I expect somebody to behave in a certain way, to treat me a certain way, and they don't, then I'm disappointed. And then I
Yeah.
can get upset or angry or resentful, and actually communicating things. Does this person know what my expectations were?
Yeah.
And I think that's something in a relationship, in a working environment,
Yeah.
in our jobs, actually communicating whether we're managing upwards or downwards. What are my expectations of this? So I'm giving you this piece of work. What are my expectations of you? And communicate those. If somebody's giving me work to do, let me fully understand what their expectations are. You
Mm,
know, and I think that's something that can help massively. But yeah, I think generally in life, bringing everything back to what am I in control and influence of? Was it Stephen Covey, habits of
yeah.
highly
Seven,
successful people?
habits of highly effective people. Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the tools I always sort of go through with clients is, of all the things creating worry, stress, anxiety, occupying space in your brain, what of those things are you in control and influence of, and which of those things are outside of it? And you know, if I'm worrying about a meteor hitting the Earth, well, that might be a very valid concern, but there's not an awful lot I can do about that. And yeah, perhaps unless I work for NASA and can invent some sort of laser or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, so trying to give your time and energy to the things that you can control and influence rather than things that you can't. Um, yeah, and I've been lucky enough to work with a few sort of athletes as well, and again, it's something that they're very much aware of. They can't control whether they win a game,
Yeah.
or win a title or win a cup. All they can control is their training regime, their nutrition, their rest, communication, you know, supporting each other, passing, getting into space, whatever the sport and whatever the game may be. It's just breaking it down to what are those things that I can control and influence, and not trying. I think having an idea of the outcome you want in life is helpful to give you direction. But then I think it becomes more about, okay, what are the daily habits, that I can do that will get me there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Simon, thank you so much for sharing and talking everything that you do and having that open conversation for men's, the possibilities that we can often find ourselves not being able to find on our own, to be fair. Is there anything else you want to share, Simon?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on. Really, really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, just to let people know, please reach out if you want to have a conversation. If you'd like to have a chat, I'm always here to do that.
Perfect. Simon, send me a couple of details. Send me your emails and things like that, and I'll put them on to the description of the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on, Simon, talking about men's
Thank you very
mental
much.
health, depression, how we can overcome depression, some key takeaways for a lot of people here. Look, it's another episode of really accentuating the fact that there is, if it's in the mind, it can be managed. And we know that people struggle. We do genuinely believe you don't have to struggle as much as you can if you just reach out. I think reaching out and starting that first step of whether it is with Simon or whether it is an Andy's Man Club or whether it is myself or somebody else in the world, having a conversation, you'll realize you're not the only one. And the second I started sharing my story about my internal conversations, how bad they were and how bad they really were, my emotions were, a lot of people like, oh my God, Cuddy, that's exactly what I'm going through. I'm like, yeah, it's bullshit. And look, meditation, we didn't really touch on meditation a lot, but meditation did change my life. And I've veered away from meditation. But when I veer away from meditation, the conversations get louder. So I always come back. Look, Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure. If it's in the mind, it can be managed. And as always, thank you very much for enjoying this podcast. Like and subscribe. Get in contact with the Mind Management Mentors podcast. And just remember, big love from Cuddy. We'll see you in the next episode.